Touchdown Tampa Bay. You're listening to the Pewtercast.
Welcome back to the Pewtercast. This is our final thoughts show where we have been grading out the Falcons game. This is actually part 2 to this entire show, Ren. These last couple of weeks, these segments have gotten long enough. We've split them into kind of 2 separate mini episodes and been able to release them out. So this is the second half. This is the one where we're going to focus on really your final thoughts and your comments, your questions, your emails, things that your fellow fans have sent to us as they've had time to think about the game and process some things out. Maybe they weren't able to join us for the instant cast. So with that, Ren, welcome back to the show, I might add, I guess, before I jump into everything.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Seems like a long time since we were together.
Thanks for having me on.
Maybe about 10 minutes, a little smoke break there.
Big fan of your work, and I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm glad you could join me here. All right, Ren, well, we always launch this spot off by looking at our iTunes reviews and pulling it up here. I see that once again for this week, we have no new iTunes reviews, which is okay. It's not really surprising this time of year. Those tend to drop off. But I do want to take this opportunity to remind everybody that if you would like to leave us an iTunes review, we would love to be able to receive that and read that here on the show. You can go to iTunes and rate and review us. We always prefer the 5-star kind if we can get that. And you do that, and we'll make sure that we read it here on the next episode. So it looks like somebody may have actually sent one in, Ren. It takes iTunes a few days for us to be able to see it. So maybe we'll actually have one for the next episode. Yeah.
That'd be cool.
But that said, we actually had a message come in on Facebook this week. So why don't we jump over there? And This comes from Frank. Frank, I'm not really sure. This might be your first message into us. Here's what Frank says. He says, it's been a long season as a Bucs fan, but what I saw last night told me a lot about this team. I don't know if Dirk comes back or not next year, but I do know that I watched a team that lost 10 players to injury and had every chance to tank this game. They did not do that, and they played with a lot of determination, even though they were struggling mightily on defense and had too many drops on offense. Did they have a lot of drops on offense last night, Ren? I don't remember.
I think they had 3.
Was there? Okay.
I know Braid had one, then Godwin had one, because we talked about it in last episode. Braid had one that would have been a first down, ended up killing a drive. And then I guess I don't know if you call Mike Evans the second play of the game for the Bucs, offensive play of the game for the Bucs. I don't know if you call that a drop. I don't know. There's probably another one in there somewhere, because I've heard 3. I've heard like whatever his numbers were last night, and I heard like that includes 3 drops and 2 clock kills. So I guess a clock kill counts as an incomplete pass.
Oh, you mean at the end of the game where they run up and they spike the ball real quick to stop the clock?
Yeah.
That counts as an incomplete pass, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so does an interception, by the way.
Huh.
Which I think is wrong. I think it should count as completion, because you're already getting the bad mark, the minus in your stat line for the interception. But, you did complete it.
Or just don't count it as a complete or an incompletion and just let it count as an interception and let it be its own thing. Let those all add up. So, hey, listen, let's just go with 3. 3 seems like I don't remember the Falcons having 3 drops. They might have. Then again, I don't watch them.
Well, Conte had 2 pass breakups and Grimes had 1.
Yeah,
so there's 3 there. But I don't think those count as incompletes. Well, yeah, they do. They go, but they're also pass breakups.
Right. Right.
Because I think the second play of the game, or maybe it was the third play of the game, where the Falcons went 3 and out, and Julio and Grimes got matched up, and Grimes got in there and knocked it away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I remember seeing on Conti's stat line, sorry, real quick, that he had 2 pass breakups.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how the numbers play out like by quarter over the course of the game, but just kind of as we were talking about in the last piece with the kind of in the final thoughts about spreading the ball around, where you have the different people, and as the injuries started to mount, we had fewer and fewer people to do that, and it seemed like people stepped up. I do feel like that we had more trouble earlier in the game than we did later in the game, and I might be wrong about that. But anyway, Frank goes on to say, he says, to be in the position to tie at the end of the game was impressive. I would agree. Then to see Patrick Murray shut down a reporter who was trying to say that a 50-yard field goal kick is tough with the response of, that doesn't matter, it's got to go in. He refused to allow an excuse and took ownership of missing it, even though that is a tough kick in that situation. I don't believe in moral victories. You win or you lose, but what I saw last night was a lot of character, and as a fan, it was great to see. Frank, I think you pretty much summed up a lot of what Ren and I talked about in the last episode in our own final thoughts of the game. So thanks for bringing that all back around for us. Didn't even know you were doing it.
Yeah, that's, you could have, I think we said all of those words in sort of that order at one point or another during the last episode. So, talked about how they fought and how it was impressive and how we like Patrick Murray's attitude and how we don't, we're not really moral victory guys, but man, the chips were really down on that team, on the Bucks, and just so close. So I think every Bucks fan's proud of the way they played. Not happy because we lost, but they're proud of the way they played.
Very good. All right. Why don't we move over to email? Sorry about that. I was trying to collect a thought here on an email. We did have a couple of emails come in late last week, Ren. So some of these will actually be talking a little bit about the Lions game. If you go back to before the Monday night game, some people were talking about whether or not Jameis was really the guy. That was kind of a topic of conversation. So let's go back and we'll read these. This particular one comes from Scott in Tennessee, and it is simply titled Jameis Winston. Scott says, hey guys, I was listening to the Instant Cast. This would be 2 Instant Casts ago now, and was thinking about Jameis's decision making. I think looking at his passes thrown compared to his interceptions is really the best way. He says in 2015, Jameis has had 335 passes with 15 interceptions for 2.8%. 2016, he had 567 passes for 18 interceptions, which is 3.1%. So he actually went up percentage-wise. And in 2017, so far, he had 329 passes with only 8 interceptions, which is 2.4%. Says he has improved marginally between, and I would clarify, he's improved certainly between the second year and the third year. He said, now let's compare that to Peyton Manning in the first 3 years. And without going into all the numbers, Peyton Manning's percent was 4.8% compared to Jameis's 2.8. Peyton Manning's second year was 2.8% compared to Jameis's 3.1. And then Peyton Manning's percentage was 2.6 in his third year compared to Jameis's 2.4. And then he asked the question, what if the Colts gave up on Peyton? Peyton even threw 23 interceptions in 2001. He says, now I'm not saying that Jameis will be anywhere near Peyton by the end of his career, but you can't give up on him. Thanks a lot, guys. Go Bucks, from Scott in Tennessee.
Yeah, I think I echo your sentiments exactly. Plus that percentage went down even more because he just threw 37 more passes.
For no interceptions.
Yeah, for no interceptions. So, or 35 more passes, whatever he did. It was no interceptions, so it definitely went down. It was, I was more than a little shocked about the, time to move on from Jameis. It sort of went from like, Jameis our franchise quarterback to it's time to move on for Jameis. There was never sort of this, does anybody out there think that Jameis might not be the guy? Like that step was totally skipped. It went from, you're our savior. He went from white horse to his neck on the chopping block in like 7 days. One performance. So that was weird to see, but yeah, I'm right there with you. I've said a few times that I think his interceptions, at least as me, I think he's really got them under control. He's had a bad couple of games. I think he threw 5 in 2 games. So that's 3, just 3 for all the other games. Now, you would like to not have a quarterback that's prone to throwing multiple interception games, but it happens. It happens.
Hey, Aaron Rodgers happened to him. He threw 3 of them in his game back the other day.
Matthew Stafford threw 2 against us. So you would like to see those games happen in between. When they happen, the gap in between games being larger and larger. And just, the carelessness with the football in the pocket, being loose in the pocket with the football is just about the last thing that worries me with him. He's just going to work and work and work and work and work and watch film and work and try to improve every single day till the day he can no longer, he's going to be one of those guys got to get dragged to the NFL. He's going to be 40, 41, 42, or he's going to have this, some sort of injury where he just can't come back for it. The NFL is going to have to retire that guy. He's not going to be like, oh, that's enough for me. He might be, like the Bucks give up on him in 15 years. Be like, okay, thanks, Jameis. Or like the Colts did with Manning and the Packers did with Favre. Like, okay, thank you very much. You're one of the best ever, but we have to move on. And you could see, Jameis just like trying to hang on, like, for one more year for like 3 or 4 years after that, bounce around from team to team. And, you're going to have to drag him out of the National Football League. So future's bright.
Future's bright. All right. Well, yeah, I agree. I 100% agree. By the way, let me say this, speaking of stats, and I love, I love that Scott brought out stats because this was kind of something that I challenged a lot of people to do. You've got to pull these stats out, pull them out in their proper context, and compare and see if Jameis is off base, and he's just not off base. Now, can I tell you something that if you were to play this forward, what actually tends to show, historically speaking, let me just warn Bucks fans out there, okay, is historically, the third year tends to be the lowest year in an interception ratio for an elite level quarterback. It starts up high, it kind of goes down. That third year tends to be one of the lowest years. Let me just put it that way. And then the fourth year, it spikes back up, and it stays up there. Now the difference is the elite level quarterbacks, they're also winning more games. So as long as you're winning games, it kind of forgives some of that stuff, Right. So that is something we will certainly want to be seeing going forward. However, if this is the stat that you're using is the interceptions and the things like that to judge whether or not Jameis is a good quarterback, his numbers just aren't out of line. That's all I'm saying. They're just not out of line, and we can expect, if his trend line matches that of other quarterbacks in this league, for them to actually spike up next year. But that's just what the trend lines show. So you heard it here first, folks.
And if he ends with 8, I would be shocked if it didn't. Like if he didn't throw an interception in these last 2 games, I would be like flabbergasted that he didn't throw something like I expect Jameis Winston, with the way he is, I expect 10 to 14 every year, so 12. As long as he throws 14 or less, I'm good. Like I would like to say 1 a game. I want less than 1 a game, but 15 is a little too close to less than 1 a game. So I want 14 or less.
Fair enough.
I'll be happy.
Now let me say this. Also, noticing Jameis's trend lines, and I think I mentioned this on last week's show. Jameis tends to have these games where his interceptions bunch together, and then he goes on a streak where he has no turnovers at all. Right. And so having that bunched up in the Lions game, he is now due for a streak, a 3-game, 4-game streak where he has no turnovers at all. So he really could end the season. Again, if the trend lines stay the same, you can't use them to absolutely predict the future, but they can help inform you, of what may or may not happen. Just to see, you make a good guess. So it's entirely possible that he could wind up the season with 8. Imagine that, Yeah. Now, this whole conversation is about to take a turn, maybe a turn for the worse, Ren. Let's just say that. Our next email, this is one more that actually came in last week. And I think what happened with these, Ren, is that didn't we record last week's episode like a day early, like a little bit earlier than we normally do?
We did.
So I think that's where some of these are still coming from. But this comes from Jim. He says, "Hey guys, it's Jim from Costa Rica. I enjoy your Bucks podcast. Thanks." Now, to the question of evaluating Jameis, Ren pledges to check the stats and compare this year's performance against previous years, clearly to prove that our QB is not regressing. That's nonsense. You evaluate Jameis's performance against expectations. That's what's meaningful. Ren's approach ignores the fact...
Against expectations. And whose expectations? Whose?
Yeah.
Like where do you get a baseline of expectations from?
Well, he goes on to explain. Let me keep reading, and he explains.
Jeez.
He says Ren's approach ignores the fact that the overwhelming focus of the offseason was #weapons for Winston.
Right.
The plan was to get a bunch of highly capable receivers, and Jameis would be unstoppable. Bad plan, and from an expectation standpoint, Jameis is a flop. Poor defense, no pass rush, bad offensive line. None of that mattered in the draft and the free agency because the expectation was, with a powerful receiving corps, Jameis would win, and he failed. ... Jim from Costa Rica.
Okay.
Let me say this, Ren, and I'll let you have the rest of your say on this. But before you go off onto your thing, Jim, thank you for listening. Thank you for sending us an email. And I 100% disagree with your premise about measuring his performance against expectations. Now, I have always been a stats guy and a data guy, though clearly not as much as even some other previous Bucks podcasters have been. I think what makes it disappointing is expectations, but I don't think that disappointment equals definition. In fact, that's a lot of what we've been seeking to talk about here on this show, is that just because you feel like your expectations weren't met, that does not actually mean that Jameis is a flop. That does not actually mean that the team or Jameis or any individual player is regressing, because I would also challenge the concept that they have a highly capable core of receivers. I don't know that we do. I think maybe we placed a little too much expectation on some of these guys. And Ren, I don't know if we've ever gotten into actually talking about that a whole lot, but that's my little initial tirade. But once again, Jim, thank you for listening, and thank you for sending in emails. Please don't hesitate to do this again in the future. But Ren, I'll let you have the microphone.
And I'm echoing Brent's sentiments. Like, thank you for listening. Thank you for sending in your email. But I'm going to have to start like where I burst in at the beginning, where your expectations might not be my expectations. My expectations might not be Brent's expectations. Brent's expectations might not be, somebody name whoever, whatever Bucks fan expectations, or Panthers fan. Like, well, we're gonna take in expectations of what the Eagles fan think the Bucks are gonna do. I had a conversation with Steve Isbitz, hanging out and having some beers. Steve is from Joe's Bucks fans and from Joe Buck fan. And most we talked about the Doug Martin situation, because I was like, you're crazy. Martin's coming back because, all the stars are aligning. He was telling me, you're crazy. Martin's not coming back. And he had a pretty good train of thought on it. I think it was more wishful thinking than anything else. But then we talked about Buccaneers record, like what our expectations were. And, I went on record and I told him, I said, well, my podcast, I said 11-5, but now really, I think 10-6 is probably a little more realistic. And he told me 8-8, and I was like, and once again, I was like, what?
You were both
I'm
wrong.
Like, well, yeah, but at 8-8, I was like, and he went off and he was right on some things. He said, I think the offensive line is not going to improve, but he thought it was because Sweezy's back was not going to hold up and they're going to have to replace him. He thought that the defensive pass rush was very susceptible and ended up being right because we lost our who were supposed to be our two best defensive edge rushers. By week 4, they were both, one was IR and one wasn't on the team anymore. So if we're just talking like that expectations, and say the Bucs win, these next 2 games and they go, what's that, 6-10? Is Isbit's expectations like is the team more of a failure because Isbit's, or more of a failure to me because I thought they go 10-6 than they are to Isbit's because they went to 8-8? Well, yeah, you could argue that because you were closer to to what he thought, but you can't measure someone's progression as a football player, especially the quarterback, from what you expect them to do. And because those are pretty lofty goals. Like name me a quarterback that's unstoppable. You said that we get these weapons for Winston and Jameis Winston will become unstoppable. No one's unstoppable. Unstoppable is scoring a touchdown every time you get the ball. Like that's unstoppable. No one's there. And then you could just sort of take the argument: if you don't win the Super Bowl, does everybody have a bad season? Because you talk to any NFL coach day 1 of OTAs, hey, what's your goal? Win a Super Bowl. What do they say like the first day they're hired and they're brought and their new coach is hired? I'm here in Tampa Bay, or I'm here in fill in the blank. We're here to win football games and win Super Bowls.
Well, when I talked to Brian Ford last week, I mean, that was his message to fans, was that's all we're trying to do here is win a Super Bowl. How do we bring a championship back to Tampa Bay? Everybody in the building, that's all we talk about.
Yeah, so is every year a failure? So out of 41 seasons, the Bucs have only had I've had one, winning season, and has the team regressed every single year since then? And no matter what team we ever put on the field and that goes and does win a Super Bowl, they can never be better than that 2002 team, even if they go undefeated and beat everybody by 100 points. But the expectation is to win a Super Bowl, and they just tied what the 2002 team did. Like, how can one team be better than the other? I understand your train of thinking. I get it. And I understand how you can make an argument for it, but there's no baseline. There's nothing. It varies from person to person. You ask 10 people about how they feel. Like, okay, ask 10 people to write a 250-word article or essay or whatever you want to call it on your feelings of the Buccaneers this year, and start out what you thought they were going to do, how you felt at the midway point, how you felt at the end of the season, and summarize it. And all 10 will be different. Everyone's going to be disappointed, but mine's not going to read like Chef Aaron's is, because his will be like fire and brimstone and burn the place to the ground, and mine will not. So does that mean that I'm right and he's wrong? It's just once again, there's no baseline to put it off of, but but if you feel that Jameis Winston has regressed, become unstoppable, then okay, or has not become unstoppable, then that's fine. I would like you to Facebook us back, or is this an email?
It's an email.
It's an email.
Yeah,
email us back, or just to put a reply on this, or just sort of continue the conversation through email about where the Bucs had to get to meet your expectations. Because I'm going to sort of cheat for you here, because if you send back like playoffs, well, that's not unstoppable. So it's just too hard to quantify from person to person, and it's just not how it's done. It's not,
I mean, Ren, I'll jump off of that, and that's a little bit of what I think what we're talking about is a little bit of what Bucks fandom podcasts kind of range in the gamut. Like, we have some podcasts that are really devoted a lot more to the analytics and, keeping a cool level head and all of that kind of stuff. And we have other podcasts that are very devoted to the emotion of the entire thing and how people feel and whatever that looks like. I think we actually kind of, like, we have some shows that are dedicated more to the raw emotions of the whole thing. And then we have others where we get a chance to calm down and actually look at the analytics. So we kind of stride the fence a little bit here at the Pewtercast. But ultimately, I think a lot of what we do here and what I think the question that then begs us is we have to ask, was our expectations too much? And by our, Ren, I'm going to kind of collectively say we as the fan base and popular people as a whole. Sure, you're going to find people who have different meanings within that, but I think for the vast majority of people, this season was very much playoffs or bust. And truth be told, a lot of people, including me, and I'm putting my hand up here, were kind of going, yeah, and I think we could make the Super Bowl this year too, and probably win it, because we were just dazzled by everything that we saw. We had that big 5-game win streak, although it was removed by a 2-1 finish at the end of the year. And this big, huge
everything came up roses for the Buccaneers during the offseason.
It sure did.
Everything came up.
And truthfully, even
we wanted Hard Knocks, we got it. We wanted Mike Smith back, we got it. We wanted Deshaun Jackson, we got him.
Right.
We wanted help for Gerald McCoy, we got it. We needed safety.
Calais Campbell would have been good, but you know what? We got Swaggy. Swaggy's cool. He dances. We'll roll with him, right? We upgraded our safety position. Got TJ Ward in there at the last minute. I mean, it looked, and even some of the deficiencies that we saw in training camp were like, yeah, it's just training camp. We'll be fine once the season starts. And so that's where I would turn some of those expectations back on the collective us. Again, that's a big reason why we exist here, is to help us as fans. And I know certainly for me as well, to be able to formulate thoughts to go, well, maybe what I'm seeing here and I'm feeling is a big disappointment. What I'm feeling is a regression for this specific player or for the team as a whole. Is it really? So we can ask that question. This is what I'm feeling. Is it really? And that's where I'll sit back and I'll say, no, Jameis has not regressed. Now, Ren, you and I are having this conversation after a Monday night game where Jameis had the best game of his entire season.
Right.
So,
yeah.
That throws this conversation a little bit into relief, too.
To be fair, we didn't point the finger and go, aha, you don't know what you're talking about.
It's true.
Look at that game, like we just did.
It's true. It is true. Because actually, I think everything that we just said, we probably would have said last week had we had this in there. So anyway, with that, Jim, once again, thank you for sending in your email. Please continue to send in emails. And I hope you take Ren up on his challenge to email us back with a response. We would love to receive that and be able to continue this conversation.
It's not a challenge, it's a request.
There you go. Request. All right, Ren, we've got one more email. It comes in from our friend Chef Aaron. Sends it in to us here. He did. He got it in just in the nick of time. Aaron says this. He says, even though we were down Gerald McCoy and Levante David to start the game, and then the players started to drop like flies and backups to the backups started to play, Riley Bulla, I'll give this team credit. They fought and they played their asses off. At the end of the day, though, this team lost, and I'm done with the moral victories. This team has had the last 10 years of rallying around moral victories, and it's gotten us nowhere. I'm in general agreement. I'm making an exception for this game, kind of like I said in the last episode.
Yeah. And I think this seems to be the overwhelming attitude of everyone's take on the game. Like, moral victories, screw that. We're supposed to have twice as many wins. I'm still pissed at this team. You guys really disappointed me this year. You've hurt my feelings. I'm very angry at you. But hey, man, really good game. Way to fight.
You're right. Exactly. I like the. I was listening to the Ira Kaufman podcast that they recorded right after the game, and there was Isbitz and Ira, and Ira's like, Isbitz, don't you come on my podcast here and start bad talking the Buccaneers. Like, not right now. We're not going to berate the Buccaneers right now, and it's not right now. We'll do it later. Not right now. I appreciated that. Anyway, listen, he goes on to say, he says, Jameis Winston played probably the best game of his career, and hopefully shut up his naysayers. Our QB has the it factor to be the franchise quarterback. He just does not have the supporting cast. As much as I've criticized Dirk with his play calling, I got to give him credit too. He called a hell of a game. However, until I see consistency from Dirk, I'm still a believer that he needs to give it up. Specifically, he's talking about the play calling there. He's got just 2 more games to prove it to me, and other advocates of him giving up the play calling to prove them wrong. Let's go back to that. Jameis Winston played probably the best game of his career. Statistically, this was not the best game of his career. Again, to quote some of our fun media people out there, Scott Reynolds at pewterreport.com put out his 2-point conversion and said, nope, not his best game. His best game was actually against the Eagles, where he had 5 touchdowns, no turnovers, and threw for more yards than he did in this particular game.
And won,
right, and had another game. So this was statistically the 3rd best game of his career. Now, that's statistically.
Right.
But, Ren, what would you say? Is this potentially the best game of his career?
And this sort of argument goes straight back to the last year. I forgot his name. The guy from Coach James?
Jim. Yeah.
James.
Same thing.
James. Sorry, buddy. From Costa Rica. I just want to say that. This sort of falls into that same argument where when you add everything in, it really was Jameis Winston's best game. Like Aaron said, of all the injuries and backups to backups, Martino was in there getting minutes. Chris Godwin was getting a lot of minutes. He really had to rely on Hump. Cameron Brate had to play more snaps than he was going to. Anthony O'Clair, Alan Cross. Jameis was throwing to guys that he doesn't normally throw to, and he was getting them the ball. So when you put that on and then put the defensive performance that we've talked about that wasn't great, but it was gutsy. From all the adversity had to come over, plus coming, being down 10 points and knowing you're probably going to get the ball 2 more times, and this is one of them, and getting a touchdown, and the defense got to stop and got us the ball back, and then Hump had a 15-yard, 20-yard punt return, and then Jameis is in field goal range with a minute to go. You put all that into like a 5-touchdown blowout where the Eagles really weren't that good, and they're down by 4 touchdowns at halftime, and they sort of throw in the towel type of deal. And you were after a quarter and a half of that game, you were in no worry or chance of losing. That's where the stats just don't tell the whole story. His calmness. It was a night game. It was a primetime game. He didn't lose his crap and go attack another player. All these things that you start to add in, then I do. As an overall game with his attitude, his poise, his demeanor, his accuracy, his escapability, I think, obviously, if you're going to hold my feet to the fire, I'd like to go back and look at all his games.
Right.
I'd have to pick out like a handful, like, okay, these 5 I want to look at. Obviously, I'm not going to go back and look at this year's Minnesota game or this year's Saints game or this year's Cardinals game. I'm not going to look at those. But I can pick out 5 and then, put together my argument with it. But, off the top of my head, because the only other game I can think of off the top of my head was the Philly game. But it wasn't that much of a challenge. It was just, it was the Bucs day and the Philly defense didn't show up, and neither did their offense, quite frankly. And they just sort of, rolled through Philly and like, oh Jesus, what happened? 5 touchdowns. Okay, great. But yeah, I'm have to say poo poo on Scott Reynolds and thumbs up to Chef.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the big thing. You were talking about it a little bit I think when you look at Jameis, his poise under center and how he controlled the offense, just his maturity level, to me, I think this was his best game. Even if there were statistically some better games that were out there, I do think that to me, those other things that don't show up on the stat line show up in saying best game. I do want to comment on this real quick. He says the QB has the it factor to be the franchise quarterback. He just doesn't have the supporting cast. Focus on the first half of that. I've seen a lot of people out there this week saying, "Oh, Jameis is our franchise quarterback. He is the franchise quarterback." I struggle this with. Do what now?
I said, I hope you're taking this where I think you're taking it, because I think I've wanted to say this, but I keep forgetting to. But go ahead.
I don't know. So we'll find out. I'm not ready to declare Jameis the franchise quarterback yet. I want to see him get through this contract and let's see where he goes. I agree. He has the ability. He has the it factor to become the franchise quarterback. I think just more time is needed. That's, I don't think he's there yet. He hasn't fully developed into all of that yet, but he's well on his way. Well on his way. And I'm excited to see where this young man's going to go in his career here with Tampa Bay. So that's what I was going to say, Ren. Is that kind of what you were wanting to get at?
Exactly, because I wanted to bring this up, how, but me personally have been defending Jameis, these past couple of weeks with those really dumb, boneheaded, loose in the pocket turnovers for 2 weeks in a row. And it would be really, and I kept saying, look, I understand what you're talking about, but I'm just not there yet. Yes, that could be a possibility. Yes, that is worrisome, but, and I don't care about his age. I think that's dumb. It's about how many years he's been in the league. But whatever, people talk, he's only 23. Who gives a shit? It's about how many games you've played, how much experience you have, how much work you put in, and are you getting it? Like, how many times you're making the same mistake more than once? That's
well. Let me challenge you on that concept, though. All right. So, Jameis played how many years in college? 2. Okay. You take him and you put him into his 3rd year in the NFL versus a quarterback who played all 4 years of college and is now in his 3rd year of play in the NFL. Do they actually have the same amount of experience? Or could you say that the college quarterback actually has a bit more experience by the time he hits his third year?
Name me a starting quarterback in the NFL that played all 4 years in college. Name one.
Well, as I've stated many times, I don't follow other players and other teams unless they're wearing a Buccaneers jersey, so I can't do that. But,
4-year starters are really rare. And 4-year starters that have come in, like, I think Colt McCoy at Texas was a 4-year starter. He didn't do anything. Now, especially nowadays, these guys, they're talking about, the 2 kids out in L.A., Rosen and Donald, USC and UCLA. They're both, I think, true sophomores. But they'll be coming out this year. So, I mean, that's just the way it is.
I mean, I'm thinking of Wentz, like Carson Wentz, he
did not start 4 years at North Dakota. He got hurt and missed 2. I think he came in as a freshman. Now, you got to remember, North Dakota State, is a powerhouse. Like, you sit in North Dakota State. Like, they got their guy. It's like a Florida State or an Oregon or a pick your big time college that football school that has has the number one guy waiting there, and you have to sit 2 years. Well, I'm a 5-star recruit, okay, but you're gonna sit 2 years before you play. I think, and don't quote me on this, but I think he came in and he was set to compete his sophomore year. But no, that's not how it went. I think he got hurt his junior year, like after 2 or 3 games, and ended up not playing the rest of that season. And then he had a season, and then he played his senior season, and they won the championship. They might have won it his junior year. I don't know. All I'm saying is I would bet my life that Carson Wentz was not a 4-year start at North Dakota State. I know what you're saying. He stayed in school till a senior. I get that. He's a little more mature, have more reps, blah, blah, blah. But I just don't think age is something, when you talk about his progression, is something that's a fair assessment. Well, he's only 23. Who cares he's only 23? This is his second and a half year. This is his third year. Doesn't matter if you're 21, 24, 27, you're not going to see an NFL defense in college. You're not. You're going to see, Alabama's the closest thing. Okay, but they're still not.
Right.
The fastest guy at Alabama's defense is probably the 7th fastest guy on any NFL team. That's just the way it is. It's just the way it works out. So
I think it was O.J. Howard was saying if they took the Alabama team and put them up against the worst team in the NFL, and O.J. Howard, hands down, very quickly said, no, the NFL team would still win. It wouldn't even be close. It just
smoked.
Yeah, they everybody in this league is good. Cleveland Browns, I don't care who you're talking about.
They are.
Yeah.
Everybody that's playing in the NFL was probably the best player on their team throughout their whole entire football playing career.
Sure.
Now there's some people the Alabamas, the Auburns, the teams in the SEC, the teams that put out some ACC teams, some teams that get 6 or 7 guys drafted. But the Virginia,
you're talking about Kentucky.
Yeah,
football.
Virginia. If
football.
Anybody gets drafted at Kentucky, anybody that gets drafted from USF, UCF, UTEP, they were the best player ever. They never played anybody probably better than them. Even on the other team. And then you get the NFL, and you're playing against a guy who's fighting for a spot who has also never played against anyone better than him. In his whole entire playing career, from Pee Wee to whatever. So, yeah, it wouldn't be close. It'd be a steamroll. It'd be like Alabama playing Notre Dame, a bunch of years ago when they rolled them in the national championship game. But anyway, so I hear what you're saying, but in today's college, it just doesn't happen. I think that I don't even know if Mariota stayed till a senior, but I think he only played 2 years as a starter. He had to sit behind somebody. So if you're going to be the last 4-year starter, I remember was Peyton Manning.
Okay.
But he didn't start the season as a freshman. Their quarterback got hurt, and they actually went with and it was between him and I think Todd Helton was. He ended up being an all-star, first baseman for the Colorado Rockies. And it took them a couple games to figure out who they wanted to go with, and then Peyton Manning got the starting job then. But they were already 3 or 4 games into the season. So I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't happen anymore. So anyway, to go back to what I wanted to talk about at the beginning is, if I'm going to sit here and defend Jameis for these poor games, I'm definitely not going to have him have his quote-unquote, which I've just said, his best game of his career, and point at it and look at all the people that I've been disagreeing with or having a conversation with about Jameis's progression and go, aha, look and see. Because one game is not a sample size.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Especially his best game.
Very true. All right, moving on. Aaron also says this defense has to be bipolar. You can't limit the run without giving up on the pass, and you can't limit the pass without giving up on the run. I'm done with Smitty's scheme. We constantly see players getting wide open, and it's just disgusting. I think I saw an image on one of the Buccaneer fan pages that had, it was either Julio or Sanu on an island with 3 defenders at least 10 to 15 yards away. The scheme may be worse than Lovey's. I don't know which is worst. I can't stop a slant or being afraid to get beat deep. All I know is they are both a detriment to the success of this team.
I'm reading about Carson Wentz.
Today's awkward pause is brought to you by Carson Wentz
and Wikipedia. Yeah, I know he's bitching about Mike Smith and his defense. At this point, I don't think Mike Smith is going to come back. I really don't. Mm-hmm. And it's a little unfair because now with all these injuries, I don't think he really has the horses. But I said it before, even if they catch on fire like they did last year, I think you really needed to take a serious look at what's going on. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, Mike Smith has not forgotten how to coach, but he either doesn't have the horses to produce his scheme, or like the Tampa 2, maybe his scheme just eventually had its day. Like, mm-hmm. His base scheme is now just too easy for NFL offenses to pick apart.
And let's actually, what if we mesh those two together? He doesn't have the horses to run his scheme properly to prove to him that his scheme is now outdated. So you sit there and you think, right. Well, it works when I have everybody, because let's face it, right? Let's look at the truth of our defense, right? TJ Ward, big free agency signing. Is it safe to call him a bust at this point? He's certainly, to go back to Jim's email, he certainly hasn't lived up to expectations.
Who are we talking about?
TJ Ward as a free agent signing on the defense.
Yeah, I would. But But maybe it's not a scheme fit. TJ Ward seems like one of those guys that he's such a seasoned pro. He could go like to Kansas City and fit in like a glove and be like, back to his old form. So it could be a scheme fit with TJ Ward. All I do know is that the TJ Ward that I watch in Denver is not the TJ Ward that is suiting up for us.
Okay, Swaggy Baker. Has he the expectation that I had, that Brent Allen had, was that he was going to take some hands off of Gerald McCoy and bolster the middle of our defensive line, be able to plug some holes, get to the quarterback. That's not helped us really much at all. So is it safe to call Swaggy a bust for this year? Or at least maybe a letdown. Maybe bust is too harsh of a word.
I don't think it's fair for him, because we saw him as the best defensive lineman in Washington, and as a defensive tackle got 8 sacks. We're like, well, hell, Gerald McCoy gets that. Like, wow, that could really help us. But then about halfway through the year, Mike Smith's getting pressured about what the hell's up with Swaggy Baker. Like, where's his sacks? And Mike Smith's like, well, we don't play him on third down. He's not right now, he's not a third down rushing option. And everyone's like, huh, well, then why the hell do we have him? That was like, if he just came off his career lead, in sacks, and it was the best defensive lineman on the team, and you signed him to free agency, why aren't you trying to capitalize on that? Which was sort of the first really head-scratching thing I've heard Mike Smith say this year. One of many. I do have the Carson Wentz information if you would like to hear it.
No, not really. I'm past that now. Go ahead. You just looked it up, so go ahead. We'll jump back to that real quick.
I was about to get mad at you. 2011 redshirted. 2012, he played in a few plays. 2013, second string quarterback, appeared in 11 games. Only threw 13 passes. 2014, became the starting quarterback and won the national championship. As a fifth-year senior, starting quarterback again, broke his wrist in the first half of he played the first 6 games, broke his wrist, and then came back for the national championship game and led him to a victory. So he had a season and a half at starting quarterback at North Dakota State.
Okay.
Which was less than Jameis Winston.
All right, fair enough.
All
right.
Sorry.
But back to what I was saying.
Back to the
my point being of going through. Okay, so Bobby McClain, cornerback. I'd say that was a successful free agent signing. But he certainly is not a dominant cornerback. He fills a hole, which to me is really what that's the main job of most free agent signings is fill a hole. However, our draft on the defensive side is as limited as it has been. I think has been fairly successful. You look at if we go back to our own guys, right? Gerald McCoy, Levante David, the recent guys, Quan Alexander, Kendall Beckwith.
And a couple question marks from 2 years ago.
Do what now?
And a couple question marks from 2 years ago.
A couple question marks. The safety we got this year, Evans. Right. But what I'm saying is the defense has not been, we have not, even when our defense is healthy and we have the horses, it's still not been a complete defensive package. Not like what we had expected it to be, or not like we thought maybe it was going to be. But in saying all of this, though, it does bring up ghosts of something about Lovey that I really, really hated, which was being more committed to your scheme than to the people and to the players. And if you remember when Mike Smith came here, he said, listen, we're going to form our scheme around the players we have and not try to force the players into the scheme that we have. And it really makes me sit back and I have to question, is that actually what we're doing? Or are we trying to force the scheme of Mike Smith onto the players that we have?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, by the way, to me, that is a damning enough thing from a coach. I never want to see that from a coach. Don't force your scheme onto the players you have. You're the coach. You adjust your scheme to what you have. That is your job as a coach.
Yeah, figure out what they do well and put them in the best position to succeed.
Yep. So, all right, moving on. He closes up his email here saying, he says, lastly, on the final drive, where was the delay of game penalty on that asshole Falcons player that deliberately laid on Brate after he got the first down? That ran off at least 5 seconds, along with a lame-ass referee falling down and fumbling the damn ball, costing the team another 5 seconds. I swear I've never seen such bad luck, or buck luck, he says, as bad as that was. I'm sure fans are going to blame Pat for the missed field goal, but it kind of looked forced in my opinion. Pat Murray has been so good since he came back. If people say that he needs to be cut, shut the F up. You obviously don't know a quality kicker after what we have been through. My prediction is 4-12 is looking more and more like it's a lock, sad to say. Hopefully something good comes out of the BS season after seeing other teams in their droughts. It needs to be our time.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything he said there in that second half. Buck's luck, I like that.
Buck luck, yeah.
Buck luck, yeah, it was good.
Yeah, he's actually got a little hashtag right in front of it.
Oh, did he? Nice. Yeah. And I haven't seen anything about Patrick Murray.
I haven't either. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, like Chef, they can recognize a good kicker when they see him. Or two, they're like, hey, this guy at least has been somewhat consistent. I think it's his third miss of the year. Mm-hmm. And we know what can happen. Like, it's not a quick fix because we've tried it, Mm-hmm. And we've been trying it since Lovey. Remember Kyle Brinza?
Oh, yeah.
You look at Patrick Murray, or not Patrick, but Patrick Murray, ended up getting Brinza, and then, of course, the Aguayo, and then we get Folk, and none of these guys, it's not just...
Connor Barth was in between.
God, thank you. That's who I was trying to think of. Yeah, so these... You just can't, open up your Rolodex and be like, hey, how you doing? You in shape? You kicking? And have this guy come in here and bang, 88% year after year after year after year. They're just, it doesn't happen. So I think it's a combination of those two things where you better be appreciative of what you have, and that Bucs fans know that, Patrick Murray is actually a pretty solid NFL kicker.
I agree. He gives us a little PS here. He says, on a side note, I am glad that Light got his option picked up. He deserves one more year to right his wrongs and get this team to the playoffs. I'm sure you heard about that, Ren. News came out this last week. We'll cover this probably more in depth on our Buck in the News show, but Jason Light had his fifth year option picked up by the Glazers. The thing that is most baffling to me, over this past summer.
Right.
And we're just now hearing about it. I will have words for the Buccaneers PR department coming up on our Buck in the News show later this week.
Are you really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I will have words. They'll be nice words because I'm trying to make friends with the people in the PR department, but still words.
friends. I mean, you sort of see this line of thinking come out like every time the press think they've been jobbed. And I don't really know if it's the Buccaneers' duty to come out and tell them everything. They've been saying like, well, they've been let me, how many times I've written a story about, Jason Light might be on thin ice because they haven't re-signed him yet. And, he hasn't been re-signed. This is his last year. He'll be a free agent at the end of the season. And they've been writing sort of that storyline all year long. Mm-hmm. And the Bucs knew that it was wrong, but didn't feel like correcting them. I just don't get that feeling of, hey, you should have told me this so I didn't look stupid.
So, so I'll say it on a different side point. All right. Because it's not all love and respect to our friends in the media room down there. I don't care if they look stupid or not when they're writing something. All right. I'm talking about as a fan base. This has been a big topic of contention over the course of this year. And, this is something that has not just affected the media. Certainly, I don't know that it's necessarily affected the internal workings of the Buccaneer organization. I don't even think the players have. I can't even say it's been something that's affected them. But as a fan base, this is something that we've spent a lot of time talking about and going back and forth on. And there is a confidence level in the team that has to reflect into the fan base as well. And this is something that they could have headed off. It's much in the same way that, when an owner comes out and says, hey, listen, this coach is going to be our coach for the next year, amid all the speculation. And the Blazers never do that with anything. And
even if he's going to fire him anyway, at least all the questions stop about the players getting harassed about it. And the coaches getting harassed about it.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I did not think of that because the only narrative I heard was about how, what I kept hearing was how sort of butthurt the local media guys were about, like, hey, man, you've been sitting on this forever. Like, how dare you not tell me? And I'm like, man, in my mind, I'm like, they don't got to tell you crap. Like, I don't see where you get off all bent out of shape about it. Like, Jason's like, contract is not public knowledge.
Right. So, and while I agree with you, Ren, I'm just seeing it from the other perspective of how it necessarily has affected fans.
And I think that's a good point.
Yeah,
and it's the vote of confidence thing that a little stability and definitely during a rocky season.
It definitely and that's the word right there, Ren, is because as fans we have felt very unstable this year. Especially as we're looking towards the future of this franchise. A lot of fans right now are deciding whether or not they're going to re-up on their season tickets for next year. And, what is the continued fandom of this team going to be going forward and things like that. And I don't know that the Glazers really care about the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows of those things. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But to provide some sort of stability, that's a good word. I like that word among the fans. So, but anyway, that is going to wrap up Chef's email. And again, we'll talk about that, like I said, a little bit more, I'm sure, in depth when we get to that on our Buck in the News show. Well, Ren, with that is going to wrap up this episode and our full final thoughts show for this week, talking about the Bucs and the Falcons. Just as a reminder to everybody out there, you can get in touch with us about anything we've talked about today if you'd like to respond. Facebook.com/ThePewterCast. Maybe you want to be like Greg, Frank, leave us a message over there. Or over on Twitter @ThePewterCast. We're talking to all kinds of people all day, every day on that social media platform. Or if maybe you're a little more winded than the 280 characters that Twitter now gives everybody, email us to thepewtercast@gmail.com. Ren, as we're getting out of here.
About your feelings. Email about your feelings.
He's actually serious about that. Email us. We'll read them.
No, I'm not serious about that. Do not email us about your feelings.
Email us and tell us what you received for Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever holiday you celebrate at this time of year. Ren, as we're getting out of here, where can the fine people out there find you on the internet?
Easiest way and best way to do it is always on Twitter @Rendax, REN_DAXT. I'm always down to talk Buccaneers football.
And if you guys want to get in touch with me personally, I am on Twitter and Facebook, both @BrentAllenLive. Ren, that is going to do it for us. I mentioned a few times here recently, this is our middle of the week show. We have a third show that comes out at the end of the week where Ren and I will be reviewing all the news that's come out of One Buck over the week. We'll be reviewing the transactions report. Apparently, we're going to have quite the few transactions going on this week, Ren. So we'll be able to talk about that. And then certainly the injury report. Correlating with the major transactions will certainly be on the injury report. So we'll have all of that and more coming up on our Buck in the News show as we get ready to take on the Carolina Panthers Christmas Eve in Carolina. Who knows what the heck's going on up there? They're going on for sale, and turns out there's people who might want to buy them. So with that, until then, people can say what they want about whether the Bucs should win or lose over the course of this, but for us here, we always vote for a Bucs win. So we'll say, go Bucs.